everybody? I am Drew Duncan, and this is the Sync 57 Sports Show. Plenty to get to today. We're going to be talking a little college football. Syracuse, as they get ready to take on Clemson. The bottom line is, to me, for this weekend, and this is exactly what we're going to get into, is there anybody out there that you legitimately think can't compete with Georgia? When you watch anybody else play, put away your fanfare for just a moment. I know we're all sick of hearing about the SEC. Believe me when I tell you, it doesn't help my bottom dollar. It doesn't help anybody else's bottom dollar, except for maybe ESPN because they have the SEC network. But outside of that, what does it really do for anybody? We're all a little tired of Alabama. It won't be long before we get tired of Georgia. Okay, I'm just asking you, though, a very simple question. All right, let's get into it. First of all, Syracuse, one of the times that I'm glad I wasn't correct. They didn't win, or pardon me, they didn't lose. Obviously, I'm glad that they won, being that they're my favorite team. But in terms of my assessment of the football team as a whole, I believe that absolutely I was spot on. Okay, the quarterback is not as good, Schrader, as they say that he is. The defense is a championship caliber defense, right? But Schrader ended up turning that football over a couple of times, and he was bailed out by the Syracuse defense playing very good. And even then, as good as I believe that they are, Chambers, the backup from North Carolina State, missed a wide open guy on a play that probably would have ended up being a touchdown and would have potentially altered how that game went down. You have Gatson and Tucker. You know, Gatson, one of the better wide receivers, I think, in all of college football. Tucker, clearly one of the better running backs in all of college football, especially in the ACC. They continue to anchor that offense. Then you've got Pena on special teams, who's just a hell of a kick returner. Look, if they're going to beat Clemson this Saturday, they better be able to create turnovers. They better be able to get good punt returns. They're going to have to force 3 and outs on every single time out. Otherwise, DJ and company, they are just going to mash Syracuse. If Syracuse wins the field position battle, they can win that football game. But that's how it's going to have to be. They're going to have to win that position battle by any means necessary. Because I just don't think that they've got enough offense. And really, at the end of the day, let's say they do beat Clemson. Do you think either Clemson or Syracuse has what it takes to beat Georgia? Let's get this out of the way. Okay? So, let's just start with the Pac-12, for instance. All right, you've already got Oregon that has already gotten hornswoggled by Georgia, right? Then on top of that, you've got USC. They just lost to Utah. The same Utah that got throttled by Florida, an SEC team, whether you want to like it or not. You had UCLA. They just beat Utah in a close one the week before, obviously. But they're out of conference schedule, UCLA. I mean, come on. It consisted of Alabama State, South Alabama, and the Pac-12 so far, you know, they haven't really beaten anybody of relevance decisively. And now with the USC loss to Utah on Saturday and Oregon already getting drummed by Georgia, do you look at the Pac-12 top to bottom and go, yeah, there's a team that could compete with Georgia? No, you don't. You don't see one. There's nobody there. And I know that a lot of people may think, well, if Oregon gets another shot, dude, they're not. If Oregon ends up coming out of the Pac-12, it is going to take a miracle for them to end up in the CFP after they got meleeed by UGA. Then if you go into the Big 12, TCU, okay, they struggled with KU, who just got beat by Oklahoma. They struggled with Oklahoma State, barely won that game, took 2 overtimes, right? At the moment, SMU, one of the teams that they played out of conference, barely a 500 team. They had a hard time with them. Not to mention, going forward, TCU still has K-State and Texas left on their schedule. So, yeah, if they went out with even one loss, maybe potentially they get in. But again, the question is, can they compete with Georgia? And I understand that they beat OU decisively, but come on, OU got 49 hung on them by the Longhorns. I just don't see TCU being able to compete, given what I saw with the SMU game, not being able to stop the Pokes on offense. When I think Georgia has just about as good as offense as Oklahoma State does. Okay, we've already talked about the ACC a little bit. When you look at Clemson, when you look at Syracuse, obviously North Carolina State, they're out now with a couple of losses. They're not going to be in the conversation. So you start looking at the ACC. Who you start looking at? Wake Forest, Clemson, Syracuse. Do any of those teams have what it takes? Clemson maybe with their quarterback, who's getting better and better as the season progresses. But I just don't know, after what I saw with Florida State, if Clemson has enough defense to stop Georgia. So maybe in a high-scoring game it goes your way. But I just don't know that they would have enough defense. Syracuse has a good enough defense, but they don't have enough offense. And you move on to the Big Ten, right? Michigan dominated a severely overrated Penn State team. I said that on, Thursday or Friday when I made my pick for that game, that I thought Penn State was severely overrated. They just did not play good football, especially in the second half. In the first half, they were very fortunate to even be in that game. Michigan made a mistake here and there. Then you start looking at Ohio State, potentially as good as it gets. They had a hard time with Notre Dame, but to their credit, since then, they have blown out every team that they have faced. So really, obviously, it's going to come down to the big game probably, right? Ohio State and Michigan. And even then, again, do you look at either one of those two teams and say to yourself decisively, I know they can compete with Georgia? We don't know. Obviously, they haven't played each other yet. And look, I'm not above understanding that matchups are a thing. All right, I get all that. I am not above saying that matchups aren't a thing. But the very real reality of it is Tennessee and Alabama just had a hell of an offensive game on Saturday. And by the way, I predicted Tennessee by 3. That's what they won by. And Bama only drops down to number 6 in the polls. There's a reason for that. And that reason is, like I said, that game doesn't do anything for the SEC Sub-West Division. So even if Bama comes out of the SEC West, which they probably will, Mississippi State, Auburn, I don't know. I don't see Ole Miss competing with either Bama or Georgia, if I'm being honest with you. So, pardon me. When you start talking coming out of subdivisions and all that good stuff, the SEC still pretty much belongs to Bama, even though I wouldn't be surprised if they lost a game. Just because of the way that we saw them struggle against Texas. They've already had some other tough games, but again, Georgia right now just handling business, blowing everybody out, doing what they're supposed to do. They're the superior team right now in college football, and they're taking care of business. And like I said, they've already manhandled a Pac-12 team. And then Florida, also an SEC East, manhandled a Pac-12 team. So again, I ask you, is there anybody anywhere that can compete with Georgia that is outside of the SEC? Tennessee may have a chance. If Tennessee comes out of the East, that's going to be really interesting how they do the CFP, because I got to tell you, I feel like a one-loss Georgia football team could still get in. Especially if they do lose to Tennessee and that game remains tight. I think the committee is going to look at that and go, but here's the thing. This conference has already beat other teams in other conferences. Alabama struggled with Texas, but they got the win. Oklahoma State has had a bad schedule outside of the conference. TCU has had a bad schedule outside of the conference. You have to realize that this is what helps anchor the decisions when it comes to the committee, whether we like it or not. Ohio State, their matchup with Notre Dame, it looked good early on. It's not right now. It's not a good look for them. But even though they struggled in that game, like I said, ever since then, they have been blowing everybody out. That game against Michigan is going to be very telling. It's going to be very telling. And Ohio State, outside of Michigan, they have Penn State, who's going to get another chance to show that, them being a top 10 team at one point was not a fluke. But I don't know if I see that happening. Don't know if I see that happening. A couple of the games that I watched, obviously I watched Syracuse, my favorite team, over North Carolina State. I've already talked about that. Man, I tell you what, that TCU game was fun to watch. Don't get me wrong. But I just really thought that their defense was better than that. I really did. I thought they had a far better defense than that. Oklahoma State had chances upon chances to win that football game, just could not get it done. I think that Oklahoma State could win their games the rest of the way. Bedlam obviously is potentially going to present a problem. Kansas State, defensively, they're not as tight as I would like to say that they are, but offensively, they're playing Coach Snyder style of football, man. Just let the quarterback run it up the middle, try and get some, plays deep, suck in that defense, and just rely on your quarterback to basically be your offense. Run the football up the middle when you do, pound the ball hard, no fear. Just go right at them. KU, obviously, I think we found out, overrated football team. Okay, they were undefeated, and they played really well against TCU, but I can appreciate what Bean and all them brought to the table, but back-to-back losses, they're done. They're done. They're out of the conversation. They're probably, to me, probably not even should be ranked. I haven't looked at anybody else past the top 10. So we'll see. We will definitely see. This Saturday should be very interesting. Obviously, I think Syracuse and Clemson is going to be the highlight of the weekend. And I don't say that just because I'm a Syracuse fan. I say that because those two teams are going to be looking to make the statement. Both are currently undefeated. Many of us, including myself, have called Clemson a bit overrated this year. And until they really show me something other that says that they're not, we'll see how it goes. All right, everybody. I am Drew Duncan. This is the Sports Show. Little college football talk for you today. Again, just to recap, you start going down. UCLA, right now, the team out of the Pac-12, they beat Utah, the same Utah that has already got smashed by Florida out of the SEC. Oregon getting smashed by Georgia out of the SEC. UCLA's schedule, not up to snuff. They haven't played anybody outside of the conference, really, that's worth bragging about. Nor have they beat anybody of relevance in that conference by a big margin. I mean, not decisively. They had a 10-point win, but that game was a little bit closer than that final score would suggest. Big 12, who do you look at? You got TCU, maybe Kansas State, but if you're coming out of the Big 12 and you want to make sure you get in, you probably want to be undefeated at this point. Because it's very logical that two teams out of the SEC could show back up in the college football playoff. We've already seen it happen on two different occasions. Okay? So it's not to say that it won't happen again. You're going to have to figure out a way to separate yourself and assert yourself and claim dominance and make sure that you get your spot. ACC, Syracuse, Clemson, Wake Forest, anybody? Big Ten. Look, we're going to be looking to Ohio State and Michigan. There's going to be a lull in the Big Ten in terms of that schedule coming up for the most part. Again, Ohio State has Penn State in between. But I just don't see Penn State as a real threat, especially given what we just saw against Michigan. The physicality, but again, Michigan, a one-dimensional football team the same way that they were last year. They had to rely on the run game. They had to rely on their defensive front, which is all very good, but they just don't have the quarterback play to get it done when all is said and done. All right. It's the Sync 57, the sports show. I'm Drew Duncan, and as always, stay safe. Take care of yourselves.